Welcome to Big Ideas Beta. This is our second year of doing this, and we're very excited to hear what the teams have put together. My name is Lindsay Lane. I'm a program manager with the Innovation Lab. And just real quick agenda items. We're going to hear some opening remarks from Dr. Philip Payne, and then we'll go through our team presentations. For our virtual attendees, you are very welcome to put questions into either the Q&A and or the chat, and we'll be monitoring those throughout the course of the presentations. If you're here in the audience, we'll be able to bring you a microphone for questions as well. Otherwise, enjoy. Thank you.
All right. As I said to Tom Moyen, I probably should have paid closer attention to the agenda because I usually make the closing remarks at this event. So I came here prepared that that's what I was going to say. But nonetheless, I think a lot of people know the origin of the Big Idea program, which was really how do we catalyze these projects that connect people that have what I would broadly describe as real world needs for innovation, whether that be around data, compute, other digital interventions or workflow, and get them connected with the right people in our academic enterprise so that they can rapidly develop and implement and evaluate interesting solutions to those real world problems. And it's different than other research that we might do here in the medical school, in that the idea is to sort of affect these endpoints at the point of care clinically or population health level or beyond. And one of the things that's been remarkable about the program over the last couple of years has been the number of successful projects. I think if you had asked Tom and I early on, sort of what a successful yield would look like, we thought maybe it might be a handful of projects that turned into either real world implementations in our health system or papers or grants. I think the actual yield has been much higher. In fact, we have a huge number of grants, lots of interesting technology that has been disclosed through our technology transfer process, as well as, again, technologies have been deployed in the health system to improve patient care, quality, safety, outcomes, and value. So this is really about speeding up the innovation process and getting our teams to form across those sort of traditional disciplinary boundaries. And so today's event, the beta event, is really how do we get sort of an update from the teams that we've funded through this program and allow them to tell us a little bit about the lessons learned, where they've had success, maybe where they've learned some important sort of real world lessons that may inform future projects, and in general, to keep the dialogue going around all of these great innovation projects. So for me, I'm always excited about this because I like projects that are practical and have some sort of measurable outcome. And I'm not very pleased when we declare success simply because something works in the lab or we wrote a paper. And this program is really the opposite of that, right? This is about how do we have real world impact. So with that, rather than having you all listen to me talk, I am going to turn things over to our first group who are going to talk to us about a really exciting project focusing on preeclampsia.
Do I have control at the? Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Valine Garberry. Like you said, I am going to talk to you about our project, Improving the Diagnosis of Superimposed Preeclampsia. This is our wearables device for non-invasive continuous monitoring of fluid dynamics in pregnancy. So first, I just want to remind us all why superimposed preeclampsia is important. Superimposed preeclampsia is a condition of pregnancy where a woman becomes hypertensive, she has high blood pressure, and that can lead to end organ damage. This is one of the most common complications of pregnancy, and it's the leading cause of maternal morbidity and mortality. And I like to think about this as a cardiorenal syndrome. It affects the heart and the blood vessels, as well as the kidneys and fluid volume. And when a pregnant woman comes into her pregnancy with high blood pressure and develops preeclampsia, we call this superimposed preeclampsia. Compared to chronic hypertension alone, patients with superimposed preeclampsia have higher risk for morbidity and mortality for the mother and the neonate, as well as more expensive labor and delivery hospitalizations and increased risk for postpartum readmission. the outcomes of superimposed preeclampsia are often more severe because it's challenging to diagnose preeclampsia in patients who come into pregnancy with hypertension. And this is because the diagnostic criteria of high blood pressure and protein in the urine are the same, even though the management strategies can be drastically different. So my big idea was to use the differences in fluid dynamics that only occur in patients with superimposed preeclampsia to identify onset and to improve diagnosis in those patients. So our project had 3 aims. The first aim was to identify the fluid profile for superimposed preeclampsia. The second aim was to compare the fluid profile to the standard of care. And the third aim was to examine the solution's acceptability to the patients and its feasibility. So we partner with a small wearables company, Healby, that produces a unique wearable that has a bioelectrical impedance sensor built in. So if you see the vertical gray titanium sensors, that's the bioimpedance sensor. It also has an optical sensor and an accelerometer that allows it to collect the same metrics as a standard wearable like a Fitbit. And our participants wore this for the duration of their time in the study while they were at home. And the sensor is taking measurements 4 times per minute. They were asked to wear it for 12 to 18 hours per day in the first part of the study. And in the second part of the study, they were asked to wear it overnight only. So our study design broadly looked like this. Participants joined the study between 28 to 30 weeks of pregnancy, and they went until they delivered. That we sent them home with a watch and they wore it each night. They had to wear it at least 3 times a week. And then each time they came in for prenatal care, they had a visit with me where I measured their fluid volume, their body composition, took urine samples, collected blood pressure logs, and a diet recall. They had surveys before they started the study about their acceptability for wearables in clinical care. They had one at 4 to 6 weeks, and we couldn't get any newly delivered women to do the end of study survey because they had this beautiful baby. So we just kind of scrapped it, but that was the initial plan. All right. So I want to tell you about the participants. So we had 30 participants that have been in our study, 32 that have enrolled in our study so far. And of the 26 of them that have delivered, 17 of them had uncomplicated deliveries. And 9 of them met the criteria for superimposed preeclampsia. But what happened is 2 subgroups emerged. 5 of them were diagnosed with preeclampsia by our clinicians, and 4 of them met the criteria but were undiagnosed. So I'm going to show you those groups differently. So on this graph, what I'm showing you is the fluid volume as I measured it in the clinic. Now, this is adjusted for body composition adjusted for body weight and body surface area as they went through their pregnancy. And so you're seeing gestational weeks on the x-axis and fluid volume. So if you see the blue line, these are the patients who maintained hypertension. You might notice that this line is a little bit more stable than the red line, which are the patients with preeclampsia. So what we see is that as a group, those patients have higher fluid volume, and the oscillations show that there was much more variability in that group. In the patients who met the criteria for preeclampsia but were not diagnosed, you see that their fluid volume isn't higher, but they still had significant oscillations, which indicates that they had a lot of variability. And what we found out after the fact is that these are the patients who developed their preeclamptic symptoms earlier in their pregnancy, and our clinicians were able to get in there and have intensive management of their pregnancies. They had lots of changes in their medication. They were more intense about monitoring these patients, bringing them in more often. So this is kind of a testament to the care that we give. And most of these patients deliver without complication. So they had the symptoms, but they were managed. And I think that there's something to be said about using this approach maybe to monitor those patients as well, because we still see the variability. So aim 2 was to monitor, to compare fluid volume to the standard of care. Now, most of these analysis that we do are at the individual level because there's so much data that we're looking at when we're doing continuous monitoring. So I pulled one case to discuss with you today. So let's call this participant Lily. What you're looking at is Lily's systolic blood pressure across the time that was reported. So this is the standard of care data. So Lily took her blood pressure at home every day. She was a very diligent patient in doing that. And she wrote it down on a sheet of paper. And when she came to her prenatal care visits, which are marked by the black circles, she reported that to her clinician. And as you might notice, each time she came for her first 2 visits to the doctor, her blood pressure was normal. And the fluctuations that would have shown in her blood pressure log are also normal because she has chronic hypertension and these fluctuations are normal. So at 30 weeks, she came in and she started our study. Her blood pressure is normal. Shortly after that, she went home and her blood pressure skyrockets, but she writes it on the paper and the clinicians don't know. And so she comes back almost 3 weeks later where her blood pressure is bordering on severe range. Lily actually came to see me first, went down to prenatal care and gets rushed to the we call it the WAC, to the Women's Assessment Center, and has an emergency delivery preterm at 32 weeks and 5 days, which is much earlier than we like, even for a preeclamptic patient. So this is what happened with Lily's standard of care. This is the smartwatch data for Lily during the time that she was in this study. So starting at 30 weeks, she comes in at, and 4 days into the study, which is 13 days before she delivered, she has an increase in fluid volume that's 16%. Now, what I forgot to say was that based on the literature, a 20% increase in fluid dynamics indicates preeclampsia onset. And our data suggests that 14% indicates preeclampsia onset. So for Lily, 13 days before, she has an increase that indicates she could have preeclampsia onset. And then again, at 6 days and 5 days before her delivery, she has 15% and 32% increase. Now, what you might be looking at is the length of the error bars. And I think that that's important because what it shows us is that in addition to the magnitude of her fluid volume going up, the variability within the day is going up. And so that's what we also see in literature. So her system is having these dramatic changes. And so that indicates that there's a problem. And if she were wearing that smartwatch, her clinical care team could have been alerted. But I like to look at this way. So if these are standardized values, so the blue line is her systolic blood pressure and the green line is her fluid volume during the exact same day during the course of the study. So if you look here at 13 days before, there's an increase, and again at 5 days. And so for me, what I see is that the fluid volume changes are in sync with the blood pressure changes, which means if either her blood pressure or her fluid volume had gotten reported, her clinical care team could have took action. However, the difference is that Lily's blood pressure data didn't get to the clinicians until her emergency delivery. The smartwatch data could have been gone immediately within minutes. And so another thing that I like to consider when we compare this is that in my cohort, only 56% of our patients took their blood pressure every other day at least. And only 25% of them kept the log, whereas they all wore the smartwatch and said that the smartwatch was acceptable. So I think that that speaks to the utility of this approach. So the third aim was to examine the acceptability and the feasibility of this. And this is data from the first group of participants that we had at the beginning of the study. This group of participants were in the study for an average of 36 days, and that's based on the course of their pregnancy. And they wore the watch on average for 12 hours a day, and we were able to use 4 hours of their nighttime data. We use that because it's the cleanest data that we had. And so I think that that kind of speaks to the fact that they're willing to use the watch and that we can get good usable data from them. So in terms of feasibility, 65% of our participants found it easy to wear the smartwatch every day, and 16% said the smartwatch irritated their skin. And we had two types of irritations. The first irritation on the left is that common irritation that you get when you wear a watch for too long. Anybody that's worn it and got in the shower, come out wet, got sweaty at the gym, you've seen that. The simple fix is to take the watch off. The second type that we got was an actual rash. Only one person had this, and we had one person that got some bruising. And so this was much rarer occurrence, but it did occur once. In terms of acceptability, 100% of the participants said that they would monitor future pregnancies with the smartwatch. In terms of privacy concerns, only 7% said that they were uncomfortable with their patient care teams having access to their data. And about a third, 28%, said that they would only share some of the data with their patient care team. And 21% said they had privacy concerns regarding third-party companies. So overall, I think this data suggests that this approach is feasible and acceptable, and that maybe we need to implement some additional guardrails in terms of data sharing with the clinical care team. We took extra precautions to make sure that third parties were not involved, so that really wasn't an issue, but maybe we needed to communicate that better with participants. So as clinical translatability and viability goes, I think overall, the data that we have so far suggests that this is a viable solution. I think maybe in tandem with some other things, like I'm really interested in this relationship with blood pressure that we saw in the data. But I think that this figure really speaks to the translatability of this. So first, what would happen is that the patient would have continuous monitoring of their fluid volume at home while they sleep, which is easy and simple and seems to be feasible and acceptable to them. When they connect that watch to their phone via Bluetooth, that phone could send critical alerts directly to that patient, which is really important. And we could add simple guardrails to allow them to control what goes directly into the patient electronic medical record. And then that information can get to the clinical care team directly. And what's not shown on this is that this cascade of information could go directly to improving the diagnosis of superimposed preeclampsia, to giving the patient care team time to intervene, to manage their care earlier so that patients like Lily can avoid preterm birth and early complications of preeclampsia that lead to those problems and the associated complications. So scholarly outputs that we've had so far, I think my biggest win has been the development of this algorithm that accounts for surface area and hydration in pregnancy. I think that was a hurdle. And so now we have that, and going into the next phase of our study, we can have an adapted algorithm. We can expose that to the participants in the app. And I think that that's going to be a big win for us. We got a couple of grants submitted to the Preeclampsia Foundation and the Obesity Society, which were scored really well, but not funded. So I plan to resubmit those. And then I went through some specialized training for dealing with not only the algorithm modeling, but for the continuous data handling. We've had, for next steps, I'm planning to take the information that I learned in this year and take that into a modified protocol that we can use next year to answer some of the questions that I wasn't able to answer this year, and to continue to refine some of the answers from AIM-1 and AIM-2. I've built some collaborations with investigators at Magee Women's in Pittsburgh, and I hope that we have, by the end of the year, some kind of multi-site grant going in, because they're really interested in seeing this work there as well. I've been invited to give a talk on innovation in obstetrics to the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine just next month. I'm really excited about that. And I'm going to be contributing to a publication on wearables and obstetrics, talking about some of the technical and ethical considerations that I've learned over the course of this study so far. Resubmitting that grant to the Preeclampsia Foundation. And then most of all, I'm really excited about the hypotheses and the projects that have been generated from this study. I'm really interested in some of the space around acceptability of wearables in obstetrics for not only patients, but for clinicians. Like, how do we get that information to them in a usable fashion? And then I'm interested in how skin tone affects the accuracy and the usability of wearables. And then building on some of the data that I've seen, like, would it be useful to move this into monitoring of severity of conditions like preeclampsia, or would this be better in tandem with remote blood pressure monitoring? So I'm really interested in moving into some of those spaces kind of as we end this project. So I think that the future is really bright for this work, and I'm excited to keep going with it. So just want to have a couple of acknowledgements. Thank you for the Institute for Innovation for the funding. Your support team, Lindsay, you've been great. Everyone has been really supportive. Thank you to my Big Ideas team. They've been incredible, my partners. And then for the Carter Research team, who helps me with the many moving parts of this project and clinical research here. So I appreciate everyone's time, and I am happy to discuss this project with you.
So I love that. And I just was curious, a lot of projects that have, looked at using wearables to produce what I'm going to sort of broadly label as streaming data, have shown that there's utility in having this data. And I love the charts that you put up there that basically shows why this is superior to sort of like episodic monitoring of, sort of, in this case, blood pressure. But getting that in front of clinicians in a way that they can sort of interpret and act on it alongside the other data that may be in the electronic health record has been a real challenge with this kind of data. And I know you haven't tackled that problem, but I'm just curious, as you've thought about it, because you have this great research team, what does that look like for you? How do you get this data in a usable format into the EHR alongside a lot of other data where the temporality is like, weeks or months at a time? And so like there's this, I don't want to say discord, but it's probably the best word I could use to describe like the difference in the timescales of the data.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've done a lot of thinking about that. And as we build the algorithm in the app, so kind of my vision for it is that the algorithm is going to be continuously monitoring fluid volume changes. And so far, it looks like a 3-day window is optimal. So my kind of vision for it is that we're never going to send continuous data to the clinicians, right? We're going to have some number that's integrated over the course of 3 days and some flag that goes up and says, you've had this much percentage change over the last 3 days, and this is an optimal range, kind of like how we would see a serum measure. So I don't think we're ever, maybe not ever, we're not going to get to a point where we're giving continuous data directly to clinicians. We're going to have some rounded integrated number that's over some consistent period of days that goes into the EMR and flags. That's the goal. Yeah.
What are we going to need to think about from a regulatory point of view?
Yeah.
So is this going to require FDA approval because it's guiding clinical decisions, or what have you guys seen so far?
So yes, absolutely. This particular watch is through a company that doesn't have all of those regulatory things in place in terms of moving into clinical care. But Apple and Samsung, who added bioimpedance sensors into their watches in 2023, have those things in place, and they already have integrations with Epic for the EMR. So my goal, I have a small in with Apple, and talking to some of their team about potentially testing their devices alongside our device in the next year or two. So what I would like to do is kind of transition into companies that already have those approvals to be used. But definitely, we're going to need FDA approval for this to be used in clinical care.
Good. Yeah, we can talk more about context into some of those.
Great.
Companies. Good.
Yeah. Was there another? Yes.
So in terms of getting the information to the physicians? I'm just wondering whether
it's better to just get it directly to the patients, and something would come up on their phone that says, hey, you need to call your doctor because this is going on. And then that way you don't have to rely on the physicians who are really busy.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, I guess the way I have been thinking about it is it would be a two-pronged thing where at the time that the patient is given the watch or the app, they would have some option to say, I want this to come to me first, or I want it to go to the clinical care team, or I want it to go at the same time, because a lot of the participants, 30% have said they want some control over that. So you're right, it would go to them first, or it could go simultaneously. And I think that that decision should maybe be at the patient level, maybe at the clinical care team level. I don't know, I kind of feel like I'm a little upstream of that decision, but yeah, I think that there would have to be some options for that.
It seems like it mimics a CGM. So like a
Yes.
continuous glucose monitor, which is exactly what that does, is it
Yeah.
alerts the patient that there's a problem.
Yeah.
And your sugars are too high, your sugars are too low, now take action. And then a number of patients will call if, hey, I'm getting these alerts, my sugar's high all the time, and alert the caregiver team. So we see it in kind of those intervals, but they get it more on the day-to-day, real time flow. So that's what it makes me think of is similar to how we manage the CGM data.
Yeah. Yeah, I think something analogous to that. It's exactly how I'm analyzing the data. Like I'm actually using like the R CGM analysis package to kind of do some of those integrations. So I think that would be good. I'm so focused on trying to get us over this hurdle that I hadn't really focused on that part yet, but absolutely, I think that that's good. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Sunny. I'm going to talk to you guys today about my Big Ideas project, which is working on trying to improve our surgical blood ordering practices. And before I get started, I just want to make sure I acknowledge everybody who's contributed to this project. It's a really long list of people, and I've received a lot of help from many different stakeholders in the blood ordering process. So as you guys know, bleeding can happen during surgery, and transfusion, when that happens, can sometimes be life-saving. But the process of finding a unit of blood that's compatible and safe to administer to the patient can sometimes take hours. So we generally don't want to wait until the patient is bleeding before we start some of that workup if we think it's likely to happen. So what we do instead is that we typically do some or all of this preoperative preparation, all of this preparation for transfusion in the preoperative setting, so that we can have blood that's available, ready to go when it's needed during surgery for patients who are at moderate to high risk of needing blood during surgery. The problem is that we're probably overdoing the preoperative preparation in an effort to be as safe as possible. So at Barnes-Jewish Hospital, for example, about 60% of our surgical patients have pre-surgical blood orders, even though only 7% of patients actually need blood during surgery. And this excessive workup probably costs the US healthcare system on the order of $10 billion a year, depending on how you value the preoperative preparation processes. And at Barnes-Jewish Hospital specifically, it probably costs on the orders of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And the other issue is that by consuming these resources, having units set aside, having excessive lab draws being performed, you kind of consume a red cell inventory for the blood bank. So when they're trying to manage their inventory and distribute units before they expire, it sometimes can contribute to red cell waste as well if resources are not being managed appropriately. And that's a huge problem because we've had a lot of blood shortages, especially during COVID. So why is it that we're so inefficient? The current standard of care is that we use something called a maximum surgical blood ordering schedule, or an MS-BOSS. It's basically a chart that says, based on the procedure that you're having, what should we do for the patient, based largely on expert opinion. The problem with this chart is that it uses information only about the procedure to determine what the blood orders should be. It doesn't take into account any information about the patient, even though we know things like the patient's red cell count or coagulopathy or things like that should affect their risk for needing blood during surgery. So our big idea was to replace this chart with a personalized model that would essentially estimate the patient-specific risk for needing blood during surgery, incorporating information about that patient, their lab values, their comorbidities, and also the procedure that the patient is planned on having. And prior to starting this Big Ideas project, we had already trained this sort of model and we had validated it across a large national database and also some Barnes-Jewish Hospital data. And all based on that kind of retrospective historical data analysis, we had reason to believe that implementing such a model to help guide pre-surgical blood ordering decisions could reduce the amount of red cell preparation orders by about 1/3. So the goal with the Big Ideas project was try to move this model closer to implementation. At the time that we started, we basically had a model that existed outside of the electronic health record, and we needed to turn it into a clinical decision support tool that clinicians would feel comfortable using and that would fit within their existing workflow and that could potentially be impactful for actually modifying their behavioral choices. So basically, we had two aims as part of this project. The first aim was to try to transform this model into an actual clinical decision support tool with a user interface that would be easy to use, to be trustworthy, easy to understand, that clinicians would be willing to use inside their current existing workflow. So that would involve kind of 3 steps. We did a lot of interviews for needs assessment, try to figure out what sort of things the clinicians would want to see in such a clinical decision support tool. And then we wanted to mock up the design, go through a few rounds of iterative prototyping to refine the design, make sure it works well for people, and then finally kind of evaluate it. And then the second part of the project was to actually take the model, put it into the electronic health record and actually validate it within Epic and make sure it's working appropriately prospectively on patients going forward, not just retrospectively, which is what we had done in the past. And specifically, we were proposing to try to evaluate it exactly where we wanted people to use it, which would be in our preoperative assessment clinic, to actually take patients, run it silently in the background and try to measure what the model would be predicting, measure what clinicians are actually doing, and try to measure what the difference between those 2 decisions would be. So I'll start with the initial part of our user-centered design, which is just to talk to clinicians, talk to key stakeholders, and figure out whether they think this idea would be useful and what they would need to see in order to try to use the tool meaningfully within their clinical workflow. So for this part of the project, we recruited 23 key stakeholders across a variety of clinical roles, including surgeons, anesthesiologists, nurse practitioners, transfusion medicine physicians. And we also had a decent amount of variation in clinical experience between all of these groups as well. What these stakeholders told us is that they generally agreed. Everybody agreed the same. Everybody agrees that the type of decision-making that they make to determine which patients need pre-surgical blood orders depends both on the patient and on the procedure, kind of like what I was telling you before. And the factors that everybody listed for what they consider was largely shared across clinical providers. However, what was interesting is that everybody also acknowledged is that there was a lot of inconsistency. So even though everybody said that they take into account the same factors about the patient, there was a lot of inconsistency into the end decision that was made. And there was a lot of reasons given for that. There was a strong feeling that we kind of just rely on our gut feeling instead of quantitative numbers. And there was also many people cited that there was kind of reasons why it's challenging to make consistent decisions, that there's a lot of fragmentation in our clinical care processes because patients come to see the surgeon, then they come to preoperative assessment clinic, then they go to pre-op and they see different providers at every step of that process. And each of those providers could be making different decisions and maybe not communicating about surgical risk appropriately with each other. And then another big issue that was cited is just because of the nature of our academic medical center, we have the clinicians that are actually placing these orders are typically relatively inexperienced, whether they're nurse practitioners who don't have OR experience or they're junior trainees who don't necessarily have that much background in clinical medicine. And so they're kind of making conservative decisions. They err on the side of being conservative because they don't want to make mistakes. And they don't have enough information or not enough training or background to know what might or might not be appropriate in these settings. And so this seemed like a clear opportunity where there's a need for more communication and more transparency about transfusion risk. This seemed like an opportunity where a clinical decision support tool could help transmit that information, improve the communication across all the different care teams that were involved. And when we asked clinicians about whether they would find utility in this sort of machine learning guided surgical transfusion risk prediction tool, we got a lot of enthusiasm about the idea. So the various stakeholder groups all thought that this sort of tool could be interesting, especially for patients or procedural populations that they didn't have a lot of experience with. And there was a large recognition that this could help reduce the amount of unnecessary orders, and there was enthusiasm for that as an idea as well. And then finally, we also wanted to make sure that we configured our model appropriately to make sure it was appropriately safe and within everybody's kind of existing practice patterns. So one really important thing is that I have a surgical transfusion risk model. It produces a risk. This is you have a 5% risk of needing blood during surgery, but we want to transform that into a decision, like maybe you should order the type and screen or you should not order the type and screen. So you need a decision threshold for that. And so we wanted to make sure we picked a decision threshold that was consistent with what people were largely using as their own personal decision threshold. And so we surveyed all 23 of our clinicians and asked them what decision threshold they would use. We got a large number of responses, both in terms of the required sensitivity of such a tool, or basically how often would we allow this to be incorrect, and also what their specific transfusion risk threshold would be. And we were gratified to see that the risk threshold that we had chosen for our model, which is a 3% risk threshold, or achieving 96% sensitivity in our patient population, was well within the bounds of what people told us. So we picked decision thresholds that were more conservative on average than most of the people that we talked to during the study. And then we got a lot of opinions about design requirements. Mostly people didn't want they didn't want any extra clicks. They didn't want it to disrupt their existing workflow. And they favored simplicity over something unnecessarily complex. So we took all that information, we created a working prototype with a lot of help from the Healthcare Innovation Lab design team. And then we went through a few rounds of iterative prototyping where we showed this design to clinicians and we asked them, can you interpret this appropriately? Because we wanted to make sure that clinicians were understanding the model output so that they could kind of have the intuition to know when the model might be wrong and when they shouldn't just blindly follow the recommendation. So there was a variety of issues that we encountered, and we kind of had to design within the constraints of what Epic allowed us to do, because Epic's cognitive compute platform only has a certain number of user interface things that we can change. So for example, and you may be feeling this as well, factors contributing to score, it was a little confusing for people to try to interpret, what does this 40% mean versus this 30 over here? Once you explain it to people, they kind of understood, but at first glance, it was a little bit hard. And then there wasn't much we could do to address that in the user interface itself. So we actually ended up adding some additional information that could be revealed if people wanted it. So we had an extra help section that people could click on. And we built this guide to how to appropriately interpret the SPath tool, including how to interpret the factors contributing to score. And then we also provided additional information about how we trained the model, how we chose the decision thresholds for the model, what sensitivity means, which is actually very challenging to explain to people. And so in the end, we have this final design that looks like this, in addition to info sheet that people could click on and find more information. And we feel reasonably confident that people could make reasonable decisions using this interface. Okay, so lessons learned from the user-centered design portion. We got a widespread agreement that there was a clinical need for a decision support system like the SPath system. The model decision thresholds that we chose seem to be within acceptable limits. Clinicians largely wanted a simple display with additional information available as needed. Through our iterative prototyping, we identified some usability issues, like we actually moved around the boxes quite a bit. Initially, we had a BPA that was involved in the decision-making process, and we took that out because everybody ignored the BPA. They were like, we never look at BPAs, so don't put it in there. And then we used help sheets to kind of address usability issues that we couldn't change due to constraints within Epic. And then finally, I think a big take home here is that explaining machine learning to clinicians was surprisingly challenging. Like, I think we all learn about sensitivity, specificity. We're tested on it routinely as part of our clinical practice and board exams and things like that. But like in the day-to-day work, we don't necessarily think about it that often. And so it was a little bit challenging to try to convey these concepts so that people could be using them appropriately. So the second part of our aim was model validation. So originally, like I told you before, our plan was to put the model into Epic, run it silently in the background as patients came into our preoperative assessment clinic, have the model generate a prediction, and then observe what the nurse practitioners were doing so we could kind of compare what the model prediction would be to usual care. So we kind of got hung up a little bit here in getting the model to run inside Epic. As I'm sure you guys have all experienced, getting anything changed in Epic is like a massive mountain. And we're like halfway up the mountain, I think, but we're not quite at the top. So we did get the model running in Epic. We did get it producing predictions on some patients. So this is actually a screenshot of it producing a prediction on a real patient inside Epic. And you can see that the user interface looks very similar to the mock-up that I showed you that we did our user-centered design on, and that was intentional, obviously. But the main issue we're having now is that the model is not generating predictions for all the patients that we expect it to be generating predictions for. And we're currently in the process of troubleshooting why that is. And hopefully, maybe in the next 6 months, we can fix that problem. Anyway, so instead of actually doing prospective validation, what we decided to do instead was to mimic prospective validation. So basically, previously when we published the model, we had done validation using Barnes-Jewish Hospital data from 2019 to 2020. So we basically just took that same model with the same decision threshold and everything and just ran it again on Barnes-Jewish Hospital data from 2021, which the model had never seen before, just to see how it would do kind of going forward. And basically, I know there's a lot of numbers here, but we'll just kind of try to focus on one thing at a time. So like I told you before, our current type and screen ordering practices at Barnes-Jewish Hospital, we order type and screens for about 60% of our surgical patients. So that's what I'm showing you on the first row. And that results in a net sensitivity of about 98%. So out of every 100 patients that need blood during surgery, 98 of them have preoperative type and screens and 2% of them don't, which means they either need emergency release blood or something else needs to happen. SPath is our personalized model, and then I also have a baseline model here that uses information only about the procedure. So it doesn't use any patient-specific information, it just uses procedure-specific information, and that's supposed to kind of simulate an MS-BOSS that we updated every year based on historical data or something like that. So basically what I'm showing you is that in 2020, which is the data I had before, there was a big decrease in the number of type and screens that you would need if you used either the personalized model or the baseline MS-BOSS approach model. And then if I carried it forward to 2021, we basically saw the exact same results. So it seemed like the model held up to prospective validation, at least in terms of adding this additional year of 2021 data to the previous data that we had done before. So that gave us some confidence that the model might continue to work going forward. The other thing that we did is that we were curious whether the model would actually perform well at other hospital centers. And that was maybe somewhat of an ambitious or radical idea because there's a long history of machine learning in healthcare where you kind of overfit your model to one institution and it like collapses everywhere else, like the Epic Sepsis model, a very famous model of this, example of this. Here, what we did is that we worked within the multi-center perioperative outcomes group. It's a consortium of data collection about anesthesiology cases across 47 medical centers across the United States. They're largely academic centers, but you can see there's an illustration of all the different academic centers here. Pretty much every major academic medical center is included. And then there's also a bunch of community hospitals, specifically in Michigan, because that's where this MPOG is based. That's also included in this data set. And we basically took the model, we ran it on each of the 47 individual hospitals individually. And then I'm showing you the median AUROC, AUPRC across each of those hospitals. So I have 47 data points. I'm showing you the median and then the 25th, 75th percentile, the min and the max. And so the take home, if you just look at the AUROC, so again, that reflects the average ability of the model to rank order, the probability that the model will rank order a patient's appropriately in risk. It's a measure of discrimination. The median AUROC was about 0.926, and that's pretty much what I found in the Barnes-Jewish Hospital data as well. And furthermore, what I found was really remarkable is that the 25th to 75th percentile bands are really tight. And so that suggests that my model actually performs really well consistently across these 47 medical centers. And the last thing I want to talk about on this slide is that I was curious, well, there's some hospitals, like one of the hospitals, the AUROC was 0.83, so what was going on there? So here, what I'm showing you in this plot here is on the x-axis, the TRANO1 pass rate is a quality measure of essentially how evidence-based are people doing transfusion at each of these medical centers. So are they measuring a hemoglobin before they actually give blood? That's what this is measuring. And what you can see is that as the TRANO1 pass rate goes up, or as the hospitals are more and more practicing evidence-based transfusion practices, my model performs better. And that was actually even more gratifying because it suggests, there are some hospitals that transfuse somewhat randomly based on personal preference, presumably. My model doesn't do very well at those hospitals. And that's okay. I'm okay with that because it's not designed to predict irrational human behaviors. But if people are going to practice more transfusion vigilance and be more thoughtful about their transfusions, my model does seem to reasonably do well. And then we also compared the difference between the personalized approach versus the baseline MS-BOSS approach, and we found something very similar, that we could get a big reduction in the number of type-in screens if we use the personalized model compared to kind of the standard approach. So if I could just summarize the lessons learned in the second half of the project, I think we are very excited about the validation data in terms of it generalizing across Barnes-Jewish Hospital data prospectively, at least within that 1 year, and then within a diverse range of hospital systems across the United States. We think this is probably one of the most well-validated machine learning models at this point in terms of the quantity of data. It's been validated across like 6 million patients across the United States. And it suggests its viability as a generalizable clinical decision support tool. So suppose we manage to get this working at Barnes, we really think there's potential that it could work for a lot of other hospital systems. And then in terms of actual lessons learned for the debugging process, which I kind of glossed over in terms of actually getting it running inside Epic, really, I think it's important to evaluate that your model is working. If you're trying to put something into Epic, make sure you evaluate it regularly. So don't just put it in, see a single prediction and feel really excited and then wait 6 months to see if it's going to work well. Maybe you should test it like within a week to see, do I even have as many predictions as I think I'm going to have? Because I think if we had done that much earlier on, we maybe would have caught these issues earlier. And then a lot of in terms of actually catching why the model wasn't working, a lot of that came around because I asked for the model to be shown just to me. We were running it silently in the background, but I was like, how about just me? You just show me the actual user interface. And then I realized that like none of my patients had any predictions, and that's how we kind of identified this problem. So I think there's a lot of utility in letting it run live for like a highly select subset of people who can then kind of anecdotally monitor and make sure it's working appropriately as well. And so the main barriers that we've had in terms of getting it to work inside Epic has been many small details. There hasn't been like a single large issue. It's been a long list of minor issues of configuration. Some of it may be growing pains in that this is the first model that we've tried to get running in Epic, but some of it may just reflect the nature. It's a very complex process getting it working in Epic, and it's hard to understand all the little details. But I think in general, having more scalable ways of evaluating and debugging the models is needed, because a lot of the debugging that's happened so far has just been me personally going one by one through patients and being like, wait a minute, what's going on here? But I think it'd be really useful to have some way of evaluating across like an entire population, a week's worth of data, figuring out why the model is or is not working. And then the eventual goal is to put the model into Epic and actually have it running inside our CPAP clinic or preoperative assessment clinic. I want to replace that chart with the model. So we got to finalize the Epic implementation, do some more user testing inside Epic, running live within people's workflow, finish the prospective validation that I said I wanted to do, and then meet with key stakeholders again to discuss the details about the implementation, because we probably don't want to turn it on all at once for everybody, and we want to be thoughtful about how we can do that appropriately. And then we'd like to write some papers as well and give some talks, and I think that's it. Yeah, thanks.
That's great, Sunny. Thank you so much. I think that's a masterclass in how to execute on an idea and present it. So I really appreciate all of it. One very small question on the performance characteristics. When you were doing sensitivity, it was to compare the number of cases that needed transfusion.
Mhm.
That was the gold standard. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Once you get through the Epic stuff and get it implemented, is there anything else we need to be thinking about, either from regulatory needs and or ongoing model drift? Because we know that's an inherent feature of machine learning models like this.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So in terms of ongoing model drift, my model in some sense is already designed to deal with that, because it uses historical data. So it says, like, based on the past 4 years for this procedure, how often have we needed to give blood for that procedure? So you could just update it, like 1 year later, you could update it and have a new prediction. And that's the form I'm calling it transfer learning, but that's how I think my model works so well across the 47 other hospitals, is because it's using that historical data. So as long as you have historical data and you can update your historical data, I hope that my model will continue to work. But it's definitely true that any sort of model, you always want to keep monitoring it. You don't want to just deploy and assume it's going to work well forever. But it's like an ongoing thing for the institution to think about for any of these machine learning models. And I'm not sure exactly where we are on that, but I agree it's an important thing. And then with regards to regulation, I think I'm not sure the FDA has really figured out what it wants to do. And Philip, maybe you know, and you can tell me. But like, I think the FDA has released a position statement about how it intends to regulate things, and then it carved out 4 exceptions, but the exceptions are like kind of fuzzy. Like, you know, they're like, as long as clinicians can understand and interpret the predictions and you give them all the information that they need to make their own clinical judgment, then it should be okay. And as long as it's not like time critical. And it's like, well, what's that? Like, so I don't think mine is time critical, but like, I don't know how exactly they're going to intend to legislate on what is or is not something that needs regulation.
So I'm not familiar with this field at all, so my question might be just totally irrelevant, but I'm just wondering if there's a health equity issue here, and if you were able to see that there's anything where clinicians make different decisions based on some unconscious biases they might have, and whether your algorithm improves that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I did not specifically there was some debate. There's always some debate about whether you should include things like race as a predictor in your model. And with regards to that, I feel strongly that you should not. And it's been well established that if you encode race into your model, you're kind of encouraging your model to learn all these societal biases and perpetuate them. But it's a good point about whether my model learns the average behavior of clinicians across the population, and it does not consider race at all, for example, or socioeconomic status or anything, or access to care or things like that. But probably there's maybe some patients in the data sample that I trained on that did not have as much access to care, and other patients that did. And trying to figure out exactly what to do about that. I think the danger is if I had encoded it, it would have definitely learned that information. I chose not to encode it, but did it secretly learn something? It's always hard to know for sure. And it's definitely worth monitoring going forward. I mean, I'd like to personally believe that a patient in front of me, I shouldn't care about that. Mostly I just care about the patient's hemoglobin and the procedure that they're having, but it's hard to know for sure.
I just had a follow-up on that. I think a way to kind of look at the effects of some of that would be to look at cities in your model that have disproportionate amounts of people of a particular race or disproportionate amounts of low income people to see if the model works better or worse in those particular hospitals. You could kind of indirectly get at that by looking at the effectiveness of your model in those places. But I agree with you. I think that's a really compelling issue that you have by not deciding not to put race in there. So I just wanted to say great presentation.
Yeah, I think we had thought about something like that, but then I just got hung up in is it supposed to be equal or is it not supposed to be equal? 'Cause I think the problem is that race and socioeconomic status are highly confounded with patient complexity, comorbidity, the stage at which they present to care. And so even if you stratified by populations that had a certain more of one type of person versus another type of person, they're not going to be equal populations except for that one variable, right? So it's hard to know what you should, I mean, and I don't know. I mean, if people have other thoughts about from the machine learning literature, how they've dealt with that, it's tricky, I guess. Yeah.
Given the high probability we're going to have continued use of machine learning and AI for predictive models and so forth, how far are we away from maybe having these large data sets somewhere connected to all of the bells and whistles of Epic in a de-identified environment to run these and figure out what will actually work instead of a trial and error within our own Epic system, which seems to be changing and so forth. And maybe some of our experts here can help with that question too.
Yeah. I mean, I think there should be, right? I think if we had more data sharing, if we had more interoperability, we could make progress faster, right? But then there's all these regulatory and legal hurdles about patient privacy and signing NDAs and things like that. So yeah, we really should. I mean, there are I trained my model on NSQIP, which is the National Surgical Quality Improvement. It's a very remarkable program. Similarly, MPOG for anesthesia quality improvement is very remarkable that these institutions have come together to pull their data. But I do agree, we probably need more of those sort of efforts. I don't know, Philip.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of extending this conversation, we are part of a program from the NIH, which is Bridge to AI. It's the largest investment from the NIH Director's Office in AI to date, and its sole purpose is to produce large, highly curated data sets for training these models that can be readily shared. So that's one option. And then I think, there are some other emerging efforts. For example, we're part of a program to produce what is effectively the successor to Mimic, which is a data set called Critical that actually has pre and post ICU admission data alongside the actual ICU episode of care. So I think there are more data sets coming along because everyone recognizes this. But my one, I guess, word of caution is no matter how good those data sets are, sort of the messy real world nature of the data in our EHR, like what Sunny's dealing with, will never be present in those data sets. So at some point, they're good for figuring out whether or not the models are feasible, but they're not good for figuring out whether or not you can operationalize them into your system. So we still have to fix the problem. How do we do it internally? So we really need both.
And I think it's somewhat of a philosophical question too, whether there are people who don't believe that generalizable models are possible. Because each institution has its own culture, its own practice patterns, its own nuances of how it encodes data this way versus that way. There's some people that feel like probably, maybe, we'd be better off just training a model for each institution and living with it. But then that puts the burden of managing that, and maintaining it on each institution and having the infrastructure. So my model seems to go against that. It seems to be generalizable, but it's, yeah. Thank you.
All right, welcome everybody. My name is Jenna Smith. This is Jenny Schmidt. All right, our big idea was remote blood pressure monitoring, a telehealth program within Epic. So our project had 3 aims. The first one was to achieve better blood pressure control for our program participants using a telemedicine program that was integrated with Bluetooth with their smartphones that was all connected to Epic. So we did achieve that aim during our pilot. Our second aim was to create this telemedicine program that would centralize outreach to patients with uncontrolled high blood pressure and in that same vein, reduce the burden of manual tracking for blood pressure for both primary care physicians and their staff as well. We did partially achieve that aim. We were able to get this hooked up and working so that we decreased the need for PCPs and staff to sort of do that manual blood pressure intervention of getting those patients' readings, but we did not centralize that outreach during our pilot. And then our third aim was to essentially increase our patients' satisfaction and engagement with this program, providing them the education and coaching for some of these lifestyle changes for their blood pressure, and we did also achieve that aim. So this is some of our patient satisfaction and provider satisfaction survey results. So our post-pilot data for patients, one of the questions that we asked was whether or not it was efficient to communicate blood pressure results to the offices. And initially we had 30% of our patients disagreed with that, and post-pilot only 1 patient disagreed with that. In addition, post-pilot, 70% of our patients strongly agreed that they were satisfied with telehealth services that their PCP provided them, which was an increase of 28% from our pre-survey results. And then post-pilot, our provider satisfaction with some of these questions increased by 50%, up to 100. So one of the things that we dealt with when we were initially creating this pilot was we wanted to really put the autonomy onto our clinical nurses to be able to manage some of the medications for these patients with uncontrolled hypertension. So this was an algorithm that we built alongside our pharmacist and our nurses for those nursing staff to be able to adjust medications when the patient's blood pressure was not controlled. So this was probably one of the best things that came from our pilot, honestly, and was extremely useful throughout it. So that was really helpful. And then some of the lessons that we learned during this project. So we initially spent a lot of time trying to create our algorithm of sort of our buckets of blood pressures and who does what when the blood pressure is in those buckets. And thanks to Mac, he helped us really simplify that. So definitely something I would encourage teams to do moving forward. And then the Epic functionality for these remote blood pressure monitoring programs were available. We just really had to tweak the specifics and get it turned on. So we were really happy that all this functionality does exist today. And then the ability for patients to upload those blood pressure readings really did help the staff and providers with reducing that clinical burden to make outreach to patients and sort of reduce that need to go back and forth and get these blood pressure readings into Epic, because all of it flows directly into Epic when patients take their blood pressure
with their, the cuff that we provided them. So that was really, really helpful. And then in addition to not only those readings going straight into Epic, but they went to clinical staff and not providers initially. So that was really helpful so that the nurses were really able to manage a lot of these blood pressure readings and adjust medications before it ever got to the physicians, so that the physicians could really focus on those really critical blood pressures or blood pressures that just weren't budging with the help of the nurses. And then based on the feedback that we got from our nurses and patients, the patients were really invested into the program and engaged in trying to essentially get their blood pressure under control so that they could graduate out of the remote blood pressure monitoring.
So looking at our patient data, this is the actual data out of Epic. 56 patients were enrolled and compliant. I think that's important. There were a number of patients who are enrolled who were really jazzed about it in clinic and then really never responded at all afterwards. So 9% of enrollees experienced no change at all in their average systolic blood pressure. And to comment on the systolic versus diastolic pressure, we originally were going to look at both, and that, to Jenna's previous comment of really simplifying down your algorithm, that made things excessively complicated. So we really just honed in on that systolic blood pressure. So about 9% had no change at all in their systolic pressure. A quarter experienced an increase in their average systolic blood pressure during the pilot. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's difference in taking it, if it's, you know, I decided to take it after my exercise, et cetera. But I think the biggest point here is that almost 2/3 of enrollees had a reduction in their average blood pressure during the pilot, and 35% of patients had a 10-point or greater drop in their average systolic blood pressure. So that's what you can see here. So we started enrolling our first patient in November of 22. And these are our average pressures. So not a huge range, but overall there was a general trend down. So in talking about why is this project part of Big Ideas, I will say this is in no way as exciting as I just built an algorithm where I'm going to predict who is going to need a blood transfusion when they go to surgery at all. And so I think for us in primary care, a lot of what we talk about is how are we going to get better care to our patients? And then we find this cool stuff and immediately our question is, how are you going to pay for it? Because we are not big money makers. And so this is a really important slide. So one of the things that we looked at, the codes are there. So there are codes that exist when you enroll a patient in a remote blood pressure monitoring or telemedicine blood pressure monitoring program. And so I don't expect you to be able to see all these numbers on the slide, but this is just an example of, these are a number of different payers, and these are their costs for a one-time charge to be enrolled in the program. It's just like a gym. A one-time cost to be enrolled in the program, their standard monthly charge, and then there's an additional charge for the actual time that is spent on this program. And so taking the average of all of these payers, some of which you can note, United Healthcare Medicaid, which is the second one, is a whopping 50 cents to be enrolled in this one-time program. And then you've got numbers that are into the 30s. So there's a pretty large range. So when we average these numbers out, if you take 100 participants, so 100 people who are enrolled in this program, and you assume that 50 of those people are going to require 20 minutes per month of additional care through the program, so outreach, calls, messaging, et cetera, and you calculate that out, that's $115,000 that you can charge. And so that's 100 patients. So when you think about the number of lives that we have in each of our clinics, there's a tremendous opportunity as far as cost, if they actually get paid for these programs. So there's the benefit to the patients of actually having better blood pressure control. There's the direct cost that we can actually bill. And then there's also the number of downstream healthcare benefits to the overall healthcare system. And so one of our big things is we just had a call about, you know, why are we not implementing this? Like here's the number, let's do this. And I will say the big barrier is the logistics of how do we document it? And then for institutions, for compliance departments to be willing to do it. So there's a big risk averse feeling. And so we don't want to get audited. How will we actually know? And so we're just not going to do it at all. And so we're doing a lot of this work already and we're just not getting paid for it. So it's really about talking to the people who are in leadership to actually get behind this and push for it. And again, it's not like a really cool new algorithm where we're going to talk about blood transfusions. It's a really simple, low hanging piece of fruit that we could use to make a big difference in patients' lives and get paid for it. But we have to have the leadership on board to be willing to support that. So thinking about why are some of the things that we wanted to achieve, do we not achieve them? So the really hugest barrier, which I don't think is going to be a surprise to anyone, was personnel. So our nurses needed dedicated time to work on these calls. And so, you know, not a huge time commitment per patient. There were the patients who needed specific outreach because they had really high blood pressures, but then there was standard outreach every 2 weeks. So it doesn't sound like a big outreach. It was very difficult though to get that into a place that wasn't a manual Excel spreadsheet that somebody had to track. So if there was a way for us to utilize Epic, and we talked with them a lot about how could we automate this so it would flag up like, hey, these are the patients who need to call today, kind of like with you know, we run our list for transitions of care calls. That would, very simple, would really offload things. And so that was a big one with these tools in Epic. This is fascinating also. Epic is not able to average the blood pressures. So that was also something we wanted of, you know, there's that random blood pressure that was crazy out there that was wrong. It can't do it. It cannot average it. And we also spent a tremendous amount of time on that because it seems like a super easy functionality. So Epic would allow us to see the last 3 blood pressures, but it wouldn't give us the average blood pressure. So we couldn't say, please alert us for anyone who's had an average blood pressure, systolic blood pressure of 150 or higher over the last 2 weeks. Couldn't do it. And then finally, I think with all patients or all projects that involve technology, it was a struggle to keep some of our patients connected. So there were some Epic updates. And so when Epic updated, that threw some of our patients kind of in a loop where suddenly it was no problem at all. And then one of them was this new button defaulted to sync data only over Wi-Fi. So then nobody's data was getting synced and then nobody knew why. So it took a while to figure it out. So there were some interruptions like that. And so just being aware that when there are those Epic updates, making sure are people still being connected? Is that something we would need to preemptively say, hey, I haven't noticed you've had it. We had an update. Is there something else going on that we need to know about? So viability of the project, really one of the biggest things that happened here was creating this protocol and the parameters. Again, very simple and ended up being much more simplified than we had initially started with, but actually creating that and then getting providers to buy in what's normal and being comfortable with somebody else changing the medications for their special patients, but really being comfortable with empowering their staff to do that. One of the things we also talked about was who is the ideal program participants. So we had left it up to providers to say, you know, who do you think would be engaged? Who can use technology and wants to do this? And I don't think that we did a very good job of that. So really looking at the participants who are successful in this and who are not to better identify who this program would be good for. When somebody is not tech savvy, that's really difficult. It's not surprising to anyone, but it also makes things harder. Even once you get it set up, when there are those little changes like those Epic updates, it's a lot more complex. The review and management of data into these e-visits, that's kind of what we were talking about. How can we make these into billable encounters? Hasn't been done at either place. And then talking about a team, either a team of dedicated nurses, if you had the bandwidth, or if you're going to have nurses work with patients who are kind of on their healthcare team, what is a way that we can automate things so that it's not so clunky for them and it can actually be incorporated into their daily workflow? We don't have any scholarly outputs yet. We are working on a submission right now. A lot of our meetings are kind of off the cadence of how this grant works. So those will be coming up. And then a big one is really, other than the scholarship part, is really working to get it implemented within our clinics so that we can continue to grow a project like this. And so getting that leadership buy-in is our huge, big next step. And that is all.
Don't undersell yourself. This is really important. And I think it's critical that we get into the math of,
Yeah.
how is this paid for and thus sustainable? And when you run your math of the 115 times the hundreds of patients, now you can at least start to see a path towards building that dedicated nursing pool, maybe some Epic stuff that can enhance what they can do, like averaging numbers, et cetera. So I think all that's really important. You guys were looking at just your clinic over at WashU, is that right?
No, so we had WashU clinics. We had
Yep.
three,
Two
two WashU clinics and two BJC clinics.
And we're all basically under a fee-for-service structure.
It's AC, BJC, ACO.
Yeah, BJC's ACO.
Yeah.
It was the ACO.
Yeah. So
Well,
we had
these aren't ACO patients.
But they
They
aren't
are-
ACO patients. Okay. So I just wonder, obviously it's a thought experiment now, but recognizing that we have a subset of primary care patients who largely live under fee-for-service, and then we have ACO and other value-based contracts. Do you think the same program structure applies and it would just be sort of a different value accrual? Or would you design it differently if it was a fee-for-service versus a value-based contract reimbursement structure?
Honestly, probably the same.
I think the same
Yeah.
also. I think that just the way that you would get that you would generate your revenue would be, do you get it because you're on the cost saving side, or do you get it because you actually can generate it in the fee for service model?
Okay,
I think it would you could use the same tools because it's very simple.
okay.
I don't think there's enough complexity to it otherwise.
And you also mentioned that there was a subset of patients who were, rah-rah in the clinic, but never showed up again.
Correct.
And then there were people who actually did participate. Do you think, though, relative to not having this program at all, we were on average getting a lot more people giving us their blood pressure information and thus being able to help them manage their health?
I mean, I can say anecdotally, yes, I think so. As a person who had patients that were in it, absolutely. And not only were you getting more blood pressures, but the number of people who I had, they're like, well, I take my blood pressure at home and it's fine. And I was like, well, I don't know what that means. But in this program, it would be the same story because they didn't suddenly start bringing all these lists of blood pressures. You could pull that up. Oh, I sent my blood pressures in last week because they were all just through this. So it's especially for the people who are pretty good at taking it at home, but never bring their pressures in or never actually send it in and give you these kind of vague answers. It actually gave you concrete information to utilize when they were back in clinic.
Okay,
So I think so.
yeah. And I think that would just help us sort of position ourselves in the community as really following on that promise. So like, we really are here to help you
Yeah.
take care of your health. And we're not going to be reliant on you writing everything down and bringing it here. We're going to give you an easier way to do that. So that may be a potential way that we can market it internally to
Yeah.
eventually have this be an external offer.
That was, I would say, a big way that I marketed it to those people. It's like,
Is that
don't
right?
worry about it. You don't need one more thing. Like, you're already doing the blood pressure. This is just gonna like take that off your plate.
Great. Thank you.
Do I need to close this?
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, hello, my name is Miguel. Thank you again for the opportunity. I'll be presenting a project, evaluation and validation of a mobile application for patient functional assessment in spinal surgery. So to start with, I would like to recap the project aims that we originally proposed. First, to develop a composite score algorithm based on wearable collected data to assess functional status of patients with lumbar degenerative spine disease. And second, to evaluate the predicted value of wearable collected data as a surrogate of functional status for lumbar degenerative spine disease. So just to give like a quick overview of our methods, basically, we enroll patients that were going to have a spinal surgery, and we gave them an iWatch at least 2 weeks before surgery, and then we developed an in-house mobile application that the patients install on their phones, and then the application send them like a notification prompt that they have to press ideally daily. And after that, the application was going to pull out information from the Health app from the phones. And basically, we're going to receive all that data. So we asked the patients to do that 2 weeks before surgery, and that continue over at least 6 months after surgery. So before getting to results, I would like to talk about the barriers that preventing us to achieve the project aims. As with any study, we have to overcome challenges regarding to participant recruitment. Some of these patients either didn't, I mean, one of the eligibility criteria of this study was that the patients own the iOS device. Most of them, they did have it, but another of the challenges that we had was that we had like another mobile study going on in the department, and some of them, it was not a good advice to try to enroll them, the same patient in the same study. So when those patients were in that study, we have to exclude them from our study. So we also have to deal with the technical challenges that the patients need to adapt to a new technology. We have to deal with the loss of follow-up that unfortunately happened with some of them. With the participant compliance, and I think this is related to the design of the mobile application that we developed, because for privacy issues and other stuff, as I mentioned, it was not like a passive tracking collection of data. The patients receive the notification prompt, the patients have to press it, and in that way we receive the data. But you know, sometimes they just like forgot to do like one day or the other, sometimes for weeks. Some of our research team have to follow up with them personally to try to get them re-engaged in the study. So one of the important technical challenges that we had, at least because in our methodology, we developed an in-house app. So it was developed by us. So we didn't partner with any companies to collect the data. Was that once we increased like the number of participants in the study, we started to see like very high cloud computer usage fees, and that was something that we could have like planned early on in the study, but when we were like recruiting patients, it was very hard to try to manipulate this while the application was in production, because the patients were like submitting data. We were submitting data every other day. And then the analytical challenges, of course, we're still like working on the feature engineering. I mean, from the output files that we received from the Help app from the iOS device. We're working on the feature selection of what wearable data features are meaningful clinically. And then to trying to fuse all those parameters into a model that is useful for a clinical problem. So here we can see the overview data pipeline that I just mentioned. We developed an in-house application in which our application again pulls data from the Apple HealthKit app, and then that is connected to the AWS cloud. And then the way that we created them functions in order to pull that data out, especially the Lambda functions, I mean, work very well with just with the initial patients. But again, as the period escalated up, and we have more patients in the follow-up stage, the usage rates of these services were a limitation in terms of the budget of the project. So again, for the results, we're able to enroll 55 patients out of 60 of the initial goal for the enrollment. We were able to screen a good number. Again, most of these patients of this pool, the patients were excluded either because they didn't have the device that was compatible with the iWatch, or they were participants in the mobile health study. We were able to optimize the data extraction organization of the data per subject and per data type. I will show you in a minute what are the variables that we're studying for our model. And as initial step to try to understand the trends of these patients, we decided to use statistical control charts. Those charts are originally used for the industry and to understand like how implementation of interventions affect like a process, but it's usually like an industry process, like a machine or like a computer that receives a new chip, or let's say like like a new process within the ER that permits like to manage the visits in the ER. So again, we understand that that a single person doesn't behave as a machine, but at least this gives us a sense of how to understand the data. So that was the first approach that we used for the analytics. And then we conducted an acceptability survey to try to understand from the patients the perspective about the value of the study and the application per se. So just to recap, this is a statistical control chart in which we can see a center line that is the average. And then we have like and then we have the center limits that define like the first, the second, and the third standard deviation. And then usually the points that are within that distribution report as changes in the behavior of the process. So here we have an example from a paper in which on the left, we see like the pain scores of different patients. And just to understand the normal variation of a process before an intervention. Okay. Apparently in this needs to be charged or something. Okay. And then in the left, we see how the process changed once we implement an intervention, in which we start to see like different values in the variation of the process. So with that assumption, again, here we have like in the statistical process control chart have like different rules to interpret the variation of a process. Again, I want to recap the assumption that again, we humans, a single person, we don't behave as a machine. So we're from our patients, from the spinal patients, we're not expecting them to be athletics. I mean, after the surgery, because they're not going to be, I mean, that's not the goal of the surgery, but at least they can try to attempt like tasks that they couldn't do before the surgery. So, and our approach to identify that was to try to put our attention on the astronomical data points instead of like, and we ignore the other rules that pertain to this type of analysis. Of the 55 patients that we included, we have to exclude some of them that didn't have like very good follow-up data. Again, due to the limitation that we have for the cloud computing services, but we're able to find like some of those patients have like good quality postoperative data, 28 for small lumbar surgeries, and 12 for big lumbar surgeries defined by the number of levels. And then at the right, we have the variables that we're studying. I mean, that we're studying from the raw files that we extracted from the HealthKit app from these patients. And I'm going to show you some of the results for a couple patients for the variables distance walking, running, and the step count. We have to know that these graphs don't show the data as the zooms per day, as we usually see like in our devices that it show us like daily. These were the number of steps that you, these were the total number of steps, etc. So our way to tackle this was just to see the capture rate for the variable. So this is telling us in a certain amount of time, let's say minutes, this person was able to do this number of steps or was able to walk this number of meters. So here we have like the graphs for the patients that have like very small surgeries. Here in this graph, we can see with the red dashed line, the time of intervention, that is the spinal surgery. And the time before represents like the variation of the number of steps, again, the rate of capture by the sensor before the surgery, and then how the variation change after the surgery. As we can see, like the variation before the surgery, I mean, is common variation as it is stated in this type of analysis. And then after the surgery, after a couple of weeks after the surgery, then we started to see more variation and then more of the astronomical data points after the surgery, again, to try to understand when the patients attempted to do more compared to the previous state before the surgery. So again, this is for one of the patients, step count. Then for the distance walking, running, the same type of behavior. We have like some variation before the surgery and how that changed after. Again, usually the pattern that we see that we were able to see here was increased variation after the surgery and then more presence of the astronomical data points after. So the data that I'm showing is for the patients that have a positive change in the patient-reported outcomes. So in this, we can see here that this patient had an ODI change, that is the patient-reported outcome, like before and after surgery. So the patient improved like their symptoms, the disease-specific symptoms after surgery, 35 points, and somehow we're able to see that in the wearable collected data. That is one of the aims of our study. So for patient 2, similar scenario. Here in this graph, we can see also one of the challenges that we have again, that is the different rate of compliance. So the gap in the data that we see for those weeks that are basically represent the time where the patient didn't where I'm very consistent, like pushing the data using the notification prompt. So when that happened, a person in a research team have to call them and try to get them engaged. And for some of the patient, again, the quality of the follow-up data especially looks like that. And that's something that we might need to play with during the analytical part. So again, this is for the step count, but again, we can still see the same trending, less variation before surgery and more variation and special core variation after the surgery. This is again for step count. For the distance walking, running, the same scenario. And then for the big fusion patient, that these patients are usually more sick, they have more symptoms, they're more disabled before the surgery. And usually for these patients, we just saw like a change bigger in the amplitude. And one of the challenges that we have for the analytics, and again, I would like to recap that there is that each patient is a process, and it's very hard to synthesize them all as a single unit. And we're still working on what could be the best approach to try to merge the information from all of them to achieve our first aim, that is to develop a score that we can, in a way that we can grade them all with a single score that we can later like test and implement clinically. Similarly, again, less variation before the surgery, more variation after, just suggesting that they were able to attend more activity for that particular variable. Again, for the step count, for the distance walking and running, this is for one of the patients that had like the big spinal surgery. For the patient 2, similarly, less variation, more variation after the surgery for this data type, the step count, and similarly for the distance walking and running. Again, here we're seeing the data of 4 of the 40 patients that we're able to evaluate the postoperative data. And again, we're not able to just demonstrate the graphs for all the 40 patients. And again, and try to synthesize them all in just one unit and present a statistic today. We're not there yet, but we're just trying to figure out what is the best statistic to do it. But in general, for patients that have like a positive change in the ODI, this was the trend that we're able to observe. In regards to the acceptability survey, we highlighted in red the questions that we took the most value of. So the first one was that in terms of like the design of application of the study, the patients in general have like a good understanding of the value of it. After that, we asked them if it was okay for them, if they were comfortable like setting up the application in which we have like an average response. And we understand this because basically the in-house application that we develop have to be like in the beta repository of iOS that is called like the test flight. And yeah, we unfortunately have to ask them to complete like a couple of steps in order to get the application up and running. That was something that we need to improve once we decide to escalate the project. And this, I would say, in terms for like the future design of the thing, this thing is gonna restart in 2 minutes.
I've got another computer to switch over.
Okay. So basically, in this question, the patients agreed that they would prefer an application in which the data is submitted passively instead of receiving like a notification prompt. For these two questions, it was like an average question, in which some of them they didn't feel like very connected to the healthcare team by participating in the study. But very few of them actually reported like that that it was complicated to participate because they were just receiving a notification prompt that they only have to press. Again, as a future direction, before we escalate the project, we need to try to optimize the behavior of the Lambda functions and how many times these functions are called. For the patient, and I would say that's a challenge for every project that entails wearable devices that plans to track patients for a long period of time. They need to think about, how often I'm going to do it and for how long, because that was like one of the important barriers that we have to encounter. So in the problems are the ones that we just said. problems regarding the data upload. But again, that's related to the design of the application, the cloud utilization rates, and usually the analytics, again, since every patient is a process, we need to think what would be the best way to try to merge them all into a single statistic that we can report. And hopefully, and try to think if it's possible to get approval for passive tracking, because again, for a long period, if we track patients for a long period of time, we can technically now in real time, what is the position of I think we're able to find the signal. So at least for the variables that we're studying, we see that it's feasible to detect the change before and after surgery. And that's what we might be able to use clinically as we see a difference before and after intervention. And something that we're able to see, at least with the methods that we employed thus far, is that as we increase the quality of the tracking, that effect might be more evident as we have more observations. The next steps for the project are to conduct the multimodal association of these variables. To achieve our first aim, that is to develop a composite score for the whole cohort, and then complete the data pre-processing, the feature importance, and the model development for a clinical problem, and then before escalation is to conduct the technical optimization of the mobile application before we relaunch it to the patients, so that we are able to support many different patient submitted data simultaneously over a long period of time, and it also will help us to address, to try to target particular subpopulation, especially like the deformity patients that are like the more sick, that we have a big interest. But yeah, I would say those are like the main next steps that we have for the project. For the school outputs, we have under preparation this initial. We still haven't submitted this yet, but it's like the correlation of the improvement in the patient reported outcomes with the wearable collected data. So we're trying to see what specific domains of the surveys of the patient reported outcomes are related to the changes that we're seeing before and after surgery, and then trying to see like how to do the multimodal association of these variables with sustained improvement of the patient reported outcomes. And on behalf of the team, I want to say thank you for the support that we have received from you all. It's been great. We are overcoming some of the limitations, more regarding the technological part. But we were able to find the signal that we were hoping to get. And thank you to the neurosurgical and orthopedic surgery spine divisions and the computer science undergraduate students and graduate students that were able to help us to keep the application alive while it was in production. It was challenging, but they were able to do a good job. Thank you.
This is great. Thank you. So you said you had about 5 more patients to enroll before you got to the total.
Exactly. But unfortunately, especially for the very last patients that we included during the enrollment, that's when we started to have like limitations in terms of budget to pay for the cloud service like rates.
Okay.
And so at that point, we have to stop the enrollment. We were like, no, we decide that the patients that we have in the cohort, let's just try to keep the system as it is and try to get good data for that cohort. And that, I would say, that's like the substrate that we're going to use for the analytics.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then the next step in the next, I don't know what timeline you have in mind, but it is to summarize the individual patient data that you've been collecting.
Exactly.
To look for mean effects.
Exactly. So again, that's something that we still need to. So we wanted to see if we're able to. So we wanted to see the difference before and after, and I think we were able to find, at least with this approach. In terms of like the statistical process control charts, there are other like different charts that we can use to try to understand them better. But I would say we will continue to that route. But in the meantime, we just want to try to extract the data features from the wearable data, and that are clinically significant. I would say that's the next step. That will be more in. That will be like more the task of or computer science colleagues that will help us to identify what features correlate more to an activity and actually eliminate some of the outliers. We acknowledge that using the first strategy, we might see some noise, like some data that might be actual outliers and not actually like a real observation. So I would say that's like the first spot that we'll do over the next month or so.
Great, thank
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to present on our project that we undertook, Care Transition Trust. And trust stands for technology to reinforce understanding and support trust. One of my better acronyms, I actually think. We had a nice team that helped us, including help from the audience, from Jenny, Jen Carson from Patient Experience, Jan Ernest, who's, if you will, our BJC expert in care transitions, Nicole Forget, another primary care provider, our 2 research assistants, Jing Lee helped with a lot of the research planning, Nathan Moore, again, ACO, PCP, Matt Reuter, hospitalist at MOBAP, who was critical to the success of this, and then Ed Seberg in IT helping us on this project. And again, thanks to the big ideas, I would not have been able to do this without the grant. So background of why I embarked on this is that, and I actually realize this is probably a mistake, this number here. I've been learning about care transitions research for more than 20 years. And the things I've learned both individually and communicating with colleagues and from the literature is that trust really does matter in our interactions with patients. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And then this project definitely aligned with what were the BJC strategic priorities, which I still think are included, safety and quality and patient progression and demand management. And I think the key thing that really drove me to do this project was realizing, based on a conversation back in my days in Chicago, that the patients don't trust me as a hospitalist as much as I might believe it. They smile at me. They seem to listen to me when I give discharge instructions. And it was a conversation with a geriatrician who was undertaking a project following patients into their home, who realized that instructions that I'd given a patient weren't being carried out. A drug I told the patient to stop taking, they continued to take. A prescription that I asked them to fill to take instead, they did not. And this geriatrician then alertly asked them, well, why not? And they said, well, I need to see my primary care provider. I trust my primary care provider. And so the geriatrician asked them, well, what was wrong with the doctor at the hospital? And they said, nothing was wrong with the doctor at the hospital. Seemed like a nice guy, but I don't know him, and I don't trust them like I trust my primary care provider. I think she enjoyed calling me up to tell me this story when she initially started the conversation with, Mark, did you know your patients don't trust you? And so I couldn't ignore that. And I've talked a lot about this, and there's been a lot of research and literature out of this. And I think a large project that we undertook back in Kentucky, where we surveyed literally 8,000 patients as they went through the discharge transition to find out how did that impact readmission rates, ED follow-up visits, and so forth. We discovered from that the assessment of patients' trust of the hospital-based team seemed to be the strongest signal to associated with reduced hospitalizations subsequently. So we decided to attempt to increase hospital discharge trust, and thus we came up with this idea of a virtual bedside handshake between the hospitalist and the primary care provider, basically using an iPad. BJH and MOBAP were the primary ones involved. We originally were using BJ West County, but for whatever reason, the patients weren't eager to participate, and we were eager to get enough patients to participate. So we were piloting the feasibility of using an iPad within the BJC hospitals to allow this video conversation, evaluate the effectiveness of the intervention by surveying patients using this consultation and relational empathy measure, or the CARE. This has been extraordinarily well studied and validated as a measure of how much patients can sense the empathy of physicians, and then evaluate clinicians' perception of this intervention. We were able to complete collection of the care measure among 200 different patients. So we had a nice baseline of what our hospitals, how empathetic they feel their hospital-based physicians are. And this was all done on the hospital medicine services at MOBAP and here at BJH. And then we delivered this intervention to 106 patients, about twice as many at BJH as MOBAP. And we found out the call was relatively short. It was 10 minutes or less usually. There was one 20-minute call, and the patient happened to be a PhD and had a family member, and there were just a slew of questions. And we learned that that was too long. Of the 106 patients we enrolled, we got pretty good response rate, 59% who completed the care survey post-hospital discharge. And this was us calling them after they left the hospital. And then we solicited clinicians' perceptions on the acceptability, appropriateness, and feasibility of this intervention, got 53% of PCPs to complete the survey and 75% of hospitals to complete the survey. And I think this was probably due to Matt Reuter. He got 100% of the MOBAP hospitalists, and that tells you how good a leader he is, probably compared to me. Anyway, there was, I think, overwhelmingly positive response from all members who participated. So going back to our original aims when I pitched this, was to document the feasibility of using this iPad to allow this conversation, to evaluating the effectiveness in their intervention, and then identify barriers and facilitators to broad dissemination, and then evaluate the clinician's perception of CT trust. And so regarding aim one, I was actually kind of surprised. We were able to complete these video conversations pretty much every single time. There were only a couple of times when the network didn't work, and we were then able to switch over and use a cellular network without any difficulties. We did have some glitches with Zoom, not surprisingly, but again, we were able to just honestly pull out iPhones and get this conversation to occur. And even had, I think, a couple of situations where we turned it in just to a simple phone call. And again, it was relatively short. We tended to almost always do it in the afternoon. That seemed to be the most convenient time. Patients and family caregivers just loved this. I don't know how else to describe it. I'll show you some quotes to support that. And importantly, they felt better prepared and more confident in their care following discharge after the call had taken place. And then clinicians' perception of the CT Trust intervention was overall positive. And they described the video conversation as useful. And we'll talk about some differences between the PCPs and hospitalists. So this is the care survey. It actually uses a simple scale we're all familiar with of PAIR for poor, fair, good, very good, and excellent. And so 5 being excellent. And you can see at baseline, the total score was definitely lower than after the intervention. And there was a lot more variability in this. Of how empathetic the patients felt their clinicians were in the hospital. And so the trust cohort got a very good p-value, and I think also a big number difference in the care survey evaluation results, demonstrating the effectiveness of the Care Transition Trust initiative to improve trust. We also looked at this, MOBAP, actually not surprisingly had a higher care value at baseline than BJH. But I think importantly, we ended up pretty much with the same number after the Care Transition Trust survey. You can see 47.3 at MOBAP and 47.5, negligible difference. So this has an impact and raises scores dramatically. We also, as I mentioned, looked at acceptability, appropriateness, and a feasibility of the intervention through the AIM, IAM, and FIM surveys that have also been validated, and showed PCPs were a lot happier with this in general than the hospitalists. Just talking to some hospitals, it appeared that this was felt to be a little bit of a burden to their busy day. And if they were having a patient surge, it was a problem. I think we screened out all the PCPs who weren't interested as we asked them to participate. And I'll talk about that here in a moment. But again, clearly there's a difference between how eager these two groups of physicians are to implement this into their regular practice. So I want to highlight, as I mentioned earlier, comments from patients, primary care providers, and so forth about this. We did basically a qualitative analysis of this. And I love this comment from a PCP. Why is this not routine to begin with? This is great. And just there's a lot of comments from this, and patients said they should do this after every hospital visit. And so since I know you're going to get the slides, I put all the quotes in, but I'm just going to highlight a few things. This was to me one of the most powerful patient comment about this. Gives me the peace of mind to travel back to my hometown of Jonesboro, knowing that the doctor finally knows what's been going on with me. It was extremely helpful to hear the hospitalist perspective on things is brought up by the primary care provider. Patients, again, feel more cared about with this intervention. I think this is the most useful thing. You've been so great. This shows you care. And then this, feeling assurance and confident. Up until that point, I was scared to go home. Afterwards, I was confident that I was getting the right care. So just having this conversation between the hospitalist and their primary care provider and video confirmation, if you will, made a huge difference. Evidence all members involved in my care are on the same page and up to date. And there's other research that shows very clearly that patients perceive commonly the physicians aren't all on the same page. And then, one of them, and then seems to have disappeared anyway. Oh, well, we'll just go ahead. The barriers preventing achievement of AIMS was really just getting and contacting the PCPs. When they were on Epic Chatter, part of our environment, if you will, we were able to get hold of them. They actually would respond when they were on vacation, and it seemed to work pretty well. Calling primary care providers in the community was a lot tougher. In fact, a lot of them asked us, well, how much am I getting paid to do this? And so we said, thank you very much for your time at that point. I actually called offices to get some to participate, and then we had some success, but it required a lot of effort. Wi-Fi connectivity, like I said, minor challenge, but wasn't a big one, much less than we expected. A big one that did surprise us was coordinating the presence of the patient in the hospital room. Multiple times we had appointments scheduled, and then the patient had physical therapy seeing them. They got hauled away for a test, and patients are busy while they're in the hospital. And so it's something that has to be figured out as we move forward. And then figuring out how to fit this into hospitalist schedule, especially when there's a surge in volume. And then I think this little question at the bottom is really the big one. Who is going to schedule and coordinate this in the future, and how do we do this? So as far as translatability and viability of the project, a proposal has actually been submitted to MOBAP to implement it fully, and it's gone up to the CMO and medical staff, but they're waiting for a response. I'm talking right now with oncology about piloting this up on Parkview Tower Siteman, because I think a big issue we have is getting good communication between the hospitalist and the outpatient oncologist. There's an inpatient oncologist scheduled to see patients in Siteman when they're hospitalized, but not the communication level we'd like with the outpatient oncologist. So I've been talking to Govinda and Patricia Litkowski about this, and we're looking at the impact on revisits. I think our numbers are going to be too small to make a big difference, and I need to actually go through and individually review the hospitalizations to determine they actually, I tried with my research assistants, but there was too much variability in this. Scholarship output, I should probably put this, we did submit a number of abstracts for posters. They're accepted, and because of travel restrictions, we didn't go. That's a whole nother story. But I'm drafting the manuscript right now. I'm pretty close to getting it finished up. And I'm contemplating an intramural grant to expand implementation. And also, there's something called the Hospital Medicine Reengineering Network, which is a group of hospitals programs around the nation of possibly doing this broadly across numerous hospitals and then submitting for a larger grant. So, and that's where we are. Questions?
This is great, Mark. I wonder with the scheduling difficulty, I'm ambivalent about this idea. Would it make sense to think about written as opposed to face-to-face communication? Would that be beneficial or is that too impersonal?
Well, I think that it occurs kind of already, especially in our environment. The primary care provider quote gets a copy of the discharge summary. I will admit the culture here is not one of emailing the primary care provider as at other institutions, and not even Epic chatting them that often, unfortunately. I think though, I actually participated in about 3 of these, I was struck with how powerful it was to have the patient's primary care provider in the room, if you will, talking for this brief conversation. And the primary care providers got excited to see their patients. Their patients and their family caregivers were incredibly excited to see their primary care provider. And it then validated, if you will, the hospitalists. The hospitalists who did participate said it was an enjoyable experience. And in fact, one of the quotes talks about creating a care plan for post-discharge among all 3 individuals. So I think what would be nice is if we could bill for this, and you're probably familiar with the care transition codes, but they can't start, thank you, Jenny, until after the patient's discharged. And so I'm want to talk to the CMS carrier to find out, could that initial care transition code be applied to this visit? Because to me, I think this would be incredibly powerful instead of what I think typically happens. Somebody calls the patient who the patient doesn't know, but they're from the primary care provider office, versus a real live visit that's lasting 10 minutes or less.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I know you're going to look at revisits. When I think about the outcomes, some of the outcomes that might matter to the system to support their implementation, it may be good to think about, would this impact any part of the HCAHPS or other patient experience scores?
I know it will. It's just, can we get the volume up enough to have this occur? That 106 patients, there are hundreds and that were sampled, and we either couldn't coordinate it or were unable to get agreement and so forth. So I think it was like 10% or less. So like I said, a lot of work went in to get this done. But I think the output was more powerful than I was expecting.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. Yes.
So I have 2 questions. One, did you?
Your voice is not
So is it on now? Do I need it? Okay. All right. So 2 questions. So one, how many PCPs did you try to engage with? Did you guys quantify that? How many you engaged with, like, that were just like, thank you, but no thank you, or like never responded?
I would say probably at least half or more fell into that category. A lot of it was more just being unable to get a response from them. That was most of it. It was a small number. If you were able to connect with them, then it was better than 50-50. We'd get them to participate in this. Though, again, I think, especially based on the comments of some of them, well, how much are you going to pay me? If I said, oh, you can build a care transition code for this, they would have been on.
So, because I feel like one of the big pieces of chatter at a lot of like primary care or outpatient general internist talks is burnout, is wellness, is what we're constantly being asked to do more, especially in the fee for service model. And then also though, engaging our healthcare teams. And so really like talking about how do we utilize the other people that are on our teams to do some of this work, so it's not all us. So I think in a fee for service world, this seems more challenging to me than in a value-based world. Which is hopefully where we're moving. But
true. But unless we could get CMS to change this, because it wouldn't be an extra code. It would be using currently existing codes, but just altering the timing of it.
But that would also then increase the burden on the PCP because now we don't make those phone calls. Our team members make those phone
Right.
calls, our RNs make them, so.
Yeah. I don't know, I guess one of the things that struck me in this is how energetic the PCPs seem to be in these calls. Maybe because it was novel, but they really were smiling, happy to see their patients and get to know that they'd been in the hospital. That was something else was brought up, how frequently they see patients in clinic and the patient's like, oh, I was hospitalized 2 weeks ago. And the PCP's, oh, okay. And they have no idea that it happened until that moment. So. Thank you.
Last but not least, it's my turn. So I'm very happy stand here to report the outcome of our project, See and Treat, a patient-centered radiation oncology paradigm. So when I present this 1 year ago, it is a project. But 1 year later, I think it's now it become a career that's unfolding in front of me. So it's like it's going to change a lot of things, down the road. Okay, so just in case if you are not very familiar with what I propose, so let's briefly go through what I propose, the problem and the solution we proposed like 1 year ago about what we're going to work on this project like 1 year ago. So for the radiotherapy is involved in over 50% of patients fighting against cancer in the United States. But however, when the patient, the first clinician, the patient, sick, is typically is not radiation oncologist because they have to go through take weeks or maybe months to get a diagnosis right from the imaging or biopsy workup before they refer to radiotherapy for radiotherapy consultation. And when the patient consent for radiotherapy, then it might take them slightly over 2 weeks for us to find them a spot to do a CT simulation, which is a process that you immobilize the patient with all physical means. And then to do a CT scan. The reason is because radiotherapy, radiation always delivered in the room coordinate, right? So you want to minimize the voluntary motion of the patient, so the radiation can be precisely delivered to the target, to the tumor, while avoiding, going through those normal organs. So that's the purpose why we want to immobilize those patients. So then, the data set will transfer to our treatment planning system, and the physician and the clinician will just do the contouring. Basically, there's a contour, give the physical coordinates of the tumor, coordinates of normal organs, so then we know how to avoid to give the radiation, how to avoid those normal organs while we're just trying to hit those targets. And then we do the treatment planning and the delivery. So this typically takes like 1 week-ish. So why we think look at the time takes for the whole workflow. You can see the most time consuming part will be get the initial diagnosis and then refer for radiotherapy consultation and then the simulation. Okay, so that's the how long mainly just like spend on waiting for those workflow, the step procedures. So, but why we wanted to reduce the time for the whole workflow, because there's a lot of studies to show there's some consequence associated with delayed initiation for the radiotherapy. So this is a study with I think it's involved like 30,000 patients, which is a lot of studies just demonstrate. So I just do some feeding. Based on the feeding takes, it just show us if you delay on average every week delay of the access to radiotherapy is going to compromise the local control by 2.4% for breast patients. And also, you know, in our practice, we constantly see patients like tumor, lung cancer tumor, just like upstage when we start to treat this patient because we just wait too long. I think the studies show that 1/3 of patients will have some like upstaging in the lung cancer. And we try a lot from our end, just trying to reduce, you know, the waiting time for the patient to start the simulation. But regardless of what we try, so this is the data we, you know, last year I present, you know, in in the pitch. So basically, the average waiting time is, you know, it can all the way from like 10 minimum, like from 10 business days to like 14 business days in the past 4 years. It's pretty stable. So it was slightly over 2 weeks of waiting time. So so then here we come this idea. It's like, okay, then why we need to wait so long? So because we know we have to wait patient for weeks before, you know, for the initial radiotherapy consultation, and a week for 2 weeks for the simulation. But why we cannot just move them, you know, just eliminate the simulation and move it up. So while the patient waiting for the radiotherapy consultation, we can just give, you know, go through the whole radiotherapy workflow. And then when the patient come to see a clinician for the first initial consultation, if the patient consent for the radiotherapy, we can tell the patient, okay, now the plan is ready. Everything's ready. If you don't get a treatment, we can treat you today. So that is our vision. So this is what we're trying to do. Of course, you know, it's very easy to say, but it's actually what we're going to do is we're going to reinvent the whole workflow, clinical workflow, because the radiotherapy workflow has been, you know, optimized for the old workflow. You know, everything has been optimized for the old workflow in the last 4 decades. So now all of a sudden we propose a new workflow. So all the technology has to be reinvented. New RT workflow. We need a CT. You know, we need to get a CT from our treatment machine, because we do combine CT, but imaging quality is not good, so we cannot really use those the CT to do the planning. And also we need to do, you know, novel immobilization, because now you just put the patient on the treatment machine. A treatment machine costs like $6 million. So you don't want to spend like 1 hour, 2 hours, just do a simulation, right? Do a simulation, do a immobilization, because you want to just finish everything in 10 minutes. So then you can move on and treat the next patient. So then you really need new novel immobilization strategy, and also the decision, like how can you support a physician, clinician to make decision on the fly? Because now patient on the couch, and you have to make decision like in 5 minutes, are you going to treat or not going to treat? Are you going to change anything in the treatment plan or not? So, you know, you have to make a decision really, really quickly. So you need a better decision supporting tool. So this is the whole thing we're trying to develop just for, you know, to support a new RT workflow. All right, so let's talk about auto segmentation. So, you know, auto segmentation, we just refer to use AI or deep machine learning technology to automatically delineate organs and target volume for radiotherapy treatment planning. So I know when talk about AI, there's like a mixed feeling, you know, in the medical community. Some people just hate AI, some just for all kinds of reasons, reimbursement, job security, or worry about the quality of AI. But luckily for radiotherapy, you know, because the auto segmentation we're trying to do is on the organ level. We're not doing the tissue level or cell level. We're doing it on organ level. So because that's something we really care. So in that regard, you know, the AI-based auto segmentation is much easier and more reliable for the radiotherapy. So I'm going to demonstrate you in the next few slides. So we work with a company called Carina. So they have this AI segmentation tool FDA approved for radiotherapy. So, you know, you can see, you can just do auto segmentation with the lung, the heart, the spinal cord, something like that. All right, so we did a few case studies. So this is a female pelvis. It actually did a pretty good job. Just to segment the femoral head, the pelvis bone, you know, the pelvic lymph nodes, bladder, uterus, and the rectum. So it pretty reasonable job. You know, if you ask a physician, or any human to do it, pretty much that's what it can do. The same quality. And also for head and neck, you can see this patient has a lot of IV contrast, so the image quality is not as good as we can bad because of IV contrast have some artifacts. But still, the software did a pretty good job, for the spine cord, the mental, the brainstem, everything else, everything, that is, critical for radiotherapy. I think they did a pretty good job just to delineate those organs. This is for head and neck, and the same thing for the thorax. You can see all those organs, can be segmented on this data set. This is a CT simulation data set. So this is typical, the CT scans that we use for treatment planning. All right, so now it's become the fun part, okay? So we're gonna compare, the performance between this AI model and human contouring. So this is, we have the control data. So this is AI contouring. This is against the manual contouring. So, we use the dye similarity coefficient. So just as the standard. So this is actually, it's more friendly for those large organs than for those small organs like the peanut bubble. So, if we compare both, we can see that pretty much, the performance is very close. If AI is not slightly better than the human contouring, compared to the normal organ, compared to the control data. So pretty much they're very similar. So we did a study on five patients. It's a prostate patient. So, we care about the bladder, the rectum, the prostate, and the femoral heads. So did a pretty good job, either for human and also AI. But again, look at the time it takes. For the AI, it takes like 2 minutes. But for human, it takes on average, this is average from 3 physicians, 57 minutes. So, so in this round, I think AI wins. All right, so one of the hurdle, we implemented a workflow in the US because we have a lot of, concerns, a lot of, suspicions about AI. So it's very hard to implement this at BJC, BJH. So what we do is actually we have partners in Uganda. So, this is called Uganda Cancer Institute. I have a lot of work with them. So they have a clinic. They treat 2,000 patients every year, but they only have 3.5 radiation oncologists. So for them, there's really no way for them to do all those contouring. They do have to use some people without any experience to do the contouring for them. So then we implement this one at UCI. You can see starting from the third quarter of last year. So they started very slowly, 36 patients, then the fourth quarter, 65. You can see the number just pick up. Eventually, I think by the first half of this year, by June this year, they've already used this the tool. This tool has been FDA approved. So treated like 332 patients and finished like 569 segmentations on those patients, and the results actually is pretty reasonable, very good. So that's why now they can treat can handle much higher patient volume than before. And I think the AI segmentation eventually will become a standard in the United States for radiotherapy. It just takes some time. It may be 1 year, maybe 2 years, but eventually it will. So, okay, so this is segmentation. So I think we have a good solution for that. Now we talk about novel immobilization. As I mentioned, you really have to find a way to immobilize the patient for the treatment because the patient cannot move, do not give them any wiggling rooms. So we have other device, but it's still under evaluation. So I'm not going to disclose today. But this one, because we filed a patent about provisional patent about 3 months ago. So I think I can share the information about this one. So this one actually uses the VR. It's a VR goggle. It's a VR goggle. It uses the gyroscope with the visual feedback, so the patient can see it. And also the clinician can see it. More important is the machine can see it. So if we detect patient is off, we'll shut off the radiation. I'm going to show you. Okay, just really quick. So she's my student, was my student. Now she's a medical physics resident in our department. Her name is Claire Chen. So she's the developer of this tool. Let me just see if I can play the video. So, because this is the video we just used to, reach out to the vendors, but it's very long. So I only just pick like 2 minutes from this video. I just want to demonstrate how it works. So you can see there's can I play this video? Oh, I cannot play. Let me see, can I? Okay, you can see this green sphere here, that presents the rotation of patient's head. You can see, she just put the device on. Okay, see, oh, sorry. Oh, shoot, sorry. I'm trying to, let me see. Okay. My bad. Okay, I'll just let you watch the whole movie and I will just explain. You can see the red sphere, that is the program position. So that is the position would determine, so the patient need to rotate patient's head, make sure the green, small green ball is inside of the large, the red ball. And then when the patient move the head, you can see it become red. It will send a signal to the machine with shuttle radiation. So, it's very safe because this is how we treat the patient before, this way. You can see this way. So we basically, it's called thermoplastic mask. So something, you have to put it in a hot water bath. Make sure the mesh getting soft, right? And then you just push to the patient's face and clip this one onto the couch. And then you wait for like 10 minutes until it cool down. The problem with this one, then, when it cool down, it became harder. So then it becomes just make a mold of patient's face. And every time for every treatment, you're going to use the same device, just immobilize the patient on the couch. It's very uncomfortable. And also the problem of this one is because you only spend like 20, 30 minutes to make this mold. And then this mold actually will keep shrinking. So gradually, over the time, the mold always tend to be like smaller than patient's face. And patients are like, oh my goodness, you cannot put it on. Then we have to go back to simulation and to make a new one. So that's the problem with this mask. And this is the new device on the real patient. You can see here, So we just set up. It's so quickly. So take like 1 minute to put it on. Patient look at it. And patient has a lot of fun. Just hold it still. Okay. So this is a comparison of the setup accuracy with this device. You can see, the day 1 and day 20 seconds, 3 weeks later, they're pretty much the same. So, it does the work, just does the job to immobilize the patient very well. All right. So another thing is about a decision supporting tool here. So, we have a lot of things, we try to, for clinician, right, you have a plan, make a plan for the clinician have to make a quick decision. But the problem is, for radiotherapy is we have a lot of specialties, we have dosimetrists to make the plan, we have the physician to approve the plan. So if the physician doesn't like the plan, it will send it back to the dosimetrist, the dosimetrist will tweak it and send it back. So even you want to change a prescription, it takes like hours, sometimes even days. So what we do here, we develop AI model. Basically, it can create a plan really, really quickly, like in a matter of minutes. And then what most important thing is, it also communicate with the physician through like a large language model, ChatGPT, something like this. So basically, we just convert the physician's order into something the AI model can understand, and then quickly and go back and modify the plan and send it back to the physician to approve. So like here, one example is right here. So this is called DVH. I don't know why. Anyway, okay, never mind. This is a DVH. Okay, so basically, this is for the tumor, a perfect shape. So this is the volume. This is prescription. So we want to maximize the dose to the tumor. So basically, a perfect shape will be a square or a rectangle like this. So now you can see you have a little bit soft here, a little bit paler here, because you are not able to deliver. In the reality, you're not able to deliver perfect uniform dose to the tumor. So that's why you see this like imperfect, some slope here. So like here, okay, the physician say, okay, the prescription is too low. I want to increase the prescription to 60 gray in 30 fractions. Typically, in the old days, it takes like hours for the dosimetrist to retweak the plan. But now, when you give the order, just through ChatGPT, send it back to the AI model. It will come back with a new plan just in a matter of minutes. And here, say, the physician say, okay, I don't like the shoulder; it's too soft because because perfect shape is like this, is like a rectangular. I don't like this plan; it's too soft. Send it back, send it to the model through ChatGPT, and it came back with this kind of the plan. So basically, you can do really, really quick just to capture the physician intention and make a new plan and send it back. So that is something has huge potential, huge market potential. All right, so we also have a novel. Okay, all our workflow. The key part is we need a new imaging modality, on our treatment machine that is able to capture CT scan with good quality imaging quality and also capable to calculate
for those calculations. So eventually, you know, the biggest vendor in our field buy in this vision. So they came up with this, you know, high quality Combin CT that can use for simulation, setup, and treatment planning. That is combined with our treatment machine. So we work with them, eventually help them to get FDA approval I think 2023, this year, to get them approval for, you know, for this purpose. You can see this is the new imaging quality, the Combin CT. This is what we had before. This is what we have now. The imaging quality is much better, and now we can even calculate the dose on this new imaging quality CT. So that's a big thing. That means, you know, the biggest vendor in our field also buy in our visions. They're going to move this in this direction. Okay, so now we have all the technology we developed. So we wanted to develop the new workflow. The new workflow actually is pretty interesting. So, you know, see here. Now we can make the plan. You can make the plan on MR. Doesn't really matter. It's diagnostic MR. It can be a diagnostic CT. Then you just get a plan, do all the segmentation, do all those techniques. Then we just get the patient to the treatment machine. On the first fraction, we'll acquire high quality Combin CT, and then we do a new plan just in a matter of minutes. And then eventually you can have a very similar, the tumor coverage and a similar sparing of normal organs. That's what we try to do. So we did a lot of, I know I'm running out of time, but so this is something we did some pilot study. You know, you can see this is a diagnostic CT. You can see the curvature here. And we have like six patients, and you can see, you know, we can achieve very similar plan between the plan created on the diagnosis CT and create on the first fraction Combin CT. And the time that takes to finish the whole procedure is all the way between like 32 minutes to like 85 minutes. So basically, we just reduce what usually takes like weeks to matter of minutes, like hours, like 1 hour, 2 hours at most. Okay, this is not a study we did because we want to showing you, you know, the plan you created on the diagnostic CT, and you adapt on the simulation CT, on the first Combin CT. You're going to get a similar coverage because you can see these two DVH lines, they overlap very well. There's some slight difference in the red one. I think this is probably the cord or is the long. I forgot what is that. But the plan quality is very close. Basically, the physician when the patient came to the radiotherapy consultation, and the physician showed the patient, okay, this is the plan you're going to get. Patient will get this plan when he comes to the treatment. All right. So we have a lot of works at the SCOME. So, you know, we already submit 2 patents. So I think more are coming, and we are going to submit grants, you know, with R1 and with also NHU grant. U grant is basically a training grant. It's a grant for those developing countries like in Africa, because there's a lot of technology we develop here actually can help them to improve the utilization of radiotherapy. We'll talk about SBIR grant because of all the business opportunity. One example I want to show you is the VR goggle thing. So think about how many patients we treat last year in the United States. Last year, for the whole brain, for the brain metastasis, I think there's 200,000 patients receive the radiotherapy just for the brain metastasis. And it has more patients treated with all kinds of brain conditions or also head and neck patients. So, you know, the market value just in the United States is over $100 million just for 1 year. So there's a lot of business opportunity there. And also manuscripts and the clinical trials. We have two clinical trials already. So one is in our clinic. So basically it's called SBRT, stereotactic body radiation for the lung cancer. So typically those will in the past will take like patient like 6 visits to the clinic. And now it only takes like 1 visit. So just come here and get treatment and go home just in a single day. And also we have another clinical trial in Uganda because they want to test this workflow. All right, so there's a lot of work here, so it cannot be accomplished without the team effort. So just want to thanks the contribution from all my team members. Thank you.
So I'm curious in the first part of your presentation where you were showing the use of sort of AI guided segmentation as opposed to sort of manual segmentation. So that basic concept has been around for a while in terms of medical image analysis, whether that be for research or clinical purposes. And it's one of those innovation ideas we look at it, and it's sort of almost painfully obvious that if we could automate that process, it would speed up treatment planning. So I guess I'm trying to understand, why is this not more commonly used today? Why is this sort of a capability that's only being explored today when it is used in other clinical contexts already for diagnostic purposes? Is there a regulatory reason? Is there sort of a technical reason? Because it feels like when you showed it, I'm like, well, of course we should do that. Like, why would we wait hours to have people manually segment when we could just have the computer do it, and potentially with greater precision?
Yeah, I think my take on this is culture. So, because the real therapy, we talk about the safety. So we worry about safety a lot, you know, the safety, radiation safety on the treatment plan. So I think there's a little bit, you know, reluctance there to accept this new technology, because, you know, we have done this for like for 4 decades, 5 decades. It's all been fine. You know, why we want to change to, you know, the AI-based segmentation, right? And also, you know, maybe that's more worry about, you know, job safety, because if this thing can be done by the AI, so, you know, we have the symmetries, you know, that do also the counseling, so they might worry about the job security. You know, there's a lot of reasons. So, but eventually we will find out, you know, I think the whole field is gradually just accept these new things. You know, they will move in, and I think that CMS or recently proposed. I think they're going to propose once, but it failed. But they're going to propose another round of, you know, the payment model reform for radiotherapy. So they've got a new payment model. It's based on the outcome, a flat fee. So I think when we move to that direction, I think there'll be more and more, you know, and I think it's more acceptable for the field. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That wraps all 6 big ideas. And I think hopefully you guys were as impressed as I was. Everybody's just done amazing work and really turned the grant opportunity into some wonderful insights and follow-on activities that I know will benefit from years to come. So thank you for all of that. I'm Tom Maddox. I'm the Vice President of Digital Products and Innovation, and oversee the Innovation Lab as well as some other technology areas here at our organization. And for those of you who haven't talked to, my big idea was at Thanksgiving to go jump on a trampoline. That was a failed idea, and I highly recommend that everybody stay the hell away from a trampoline unless you want a broken ankle. We of course greatly appreciate not only the awardees, but certainly the lab staff that have been instrumental in organizing all of this. There are many people involved, but I will call out Lindsay Lay in particular, who coordinates our program and just does a masterful job. So thank you for that. We did want to take the opportunity to say what's next. The group you saw here, I believe, represents our 4th Big Ideas cohort. We have our 5th cohort that are currently actively executing on their awards. And so our 6th cohort will be selected in just a few months. So we did want to put those dates and activities in front of you all. And if I can get the next slide, or do I do it? Let me do this. Here we go. Just wanted to alert you to what's coming. And certainly you are not restricted to only having one big idea. We have had several people who are multiple award winners. So certainly if your teams have an idea that would be good for a next batch of funding, consider application. And please be evangelists. If you have colleagues or other folks who have a creative idea that sits that intersection of care delivery innovation and informatics, we want to hear about it. We have office hours scattered through January through March. You can see the dates and times listed. They're typically in person over at the Mid-Campus Center, so pretty easy to get to. And there'll be a mix of us there to help you talk through your idea and see how you might most competitively propose it. And so do take advantage of that. Even if you have just the beginnings of an idea, the point of the office hours is for us to help you shape it a little bit. We then will ask you to submit a letter of intent. It's a relatively low lift, 1 to 2 pages. That would be due on March 27th. We then pick a subset of what we think the best ideas are from those letters of intent. And we invite them to do two things: to come give us an in-person pitch. So similar to what we had today, you will get a slot at the podium to sort of pitch your idea to a broad group of people, including judges of both clinicians and healthcare administrators. That pitch event will be on May 14th. We'll also ask you to submit a full proposal. And so that's a bit bigger, 6 to 12 pages, bit of a template there that will just give us more detail about what exactly are you proposing and how you would use the time, support, and money inherent in the award. So those full applications would be due 2 weeks or so after the pitch event on May 28th. And then what we do is select on average 6 winners, and we would notify them on June 13. And then the funding runs the academic cycle. So the funding would start on July 1 and run through the following June 30. So again, we've had on the order of 32 or so awards given out over the life of this program, and they've generated all sorts of interesting ideas. You heard 6 today, and we're excited to pick the next 6. I will say on average, we have about 30 letters of intent that come to us. And so as a result, if you run the math, the yield is quite high. It's certainly a lot better than the NIH and some of the other grant organizations. So even though it's competitive, it's not overwhelming odds. And I think it's certainly a worthwhile investment of time to take advantage of this intramural funding opportunity. So all of this information is available at the URL you see here. And then Lindsay's email is in there. So anything that's not being answered by the text, just shoot us an email and we'll get you an answer quickly. The final thing I wanted to say in relationship to this program is that this year we've got an added opportunity. And we learned earlier this year about an opportunity through the Pittsburgh Regional Health Initiative. It's a philanthropic organization that has been trying to increase innovation, specifically in innovations around patient safety. And so what this organization is doing in partnership with us is giving us an additional $10,000. And the idea is that we would attach it to the $50,000 that we hand out as one of our awards. So a total of $60,000. As long as the project touches on one of the 5 bullets you see here, either medication related, medical complications with patient care, procedure or surgical related, infections or diagnostic errors, any of these safety areas, if your idea is attacking an issue in one of those domains, then you would be eligible for this additional amount of funding, and just gives you further opportunity to develop that idea. So we have in the application materials a way to indicate if you believe it's competitive in these areas of inquiry and thus eligible for that additional $10,000. And again, if you have a question about maybe is it, maybe isn't it, shoot us an email. We can get some clarity for you. But we were excited to find this partner, and this will be a little bit something new for the subset of proposals that might have an interest in patient safety. So with that, again, thank all of you, both the people in the room, those who had to step away early, and those of you online. Your interest and support of this overall program is essential. We couldn't do it without you. So thank you for your time. Stay warm. Cold is coming, and we'll see you next time at the Big Ideas event.